Tomorrow's Halloween. Grab a blanket, turn off your lights for 3 true scary Halloween horror stories. Be careful who you open your door to on Halloween. This incident happened to me last year on Halloween. My little brother and I were home alone since our parents had gone out to a Halloween party. They had tasked us with handing out candies to the trick-or-treaters. This bummed my brother and I out because we had made plans to go trick-or-treating with a few friends. Our parents told us that we were too old to still be trick-or-treating and that we could instead invite our friends over to the house and hang out there. My friends declined my invitation to come over because they still wanted to go trick-or-treating, so that left me home alone with my brother, handing out candy. A lot of people stopped by our house, and by 10, almost all of the candy was gone. My brother and I decided that we'd eat the rest. We were sitting on the couch, watching a scary movie, stuffing ourselves with candy, when there was a knock at the door. I stormed off the couch, wondering who the hell could be knocking on our door this late. I assumed that it was just some late-night trick-or-treaters. Even if that was the case, I had turned the porch light and Halloween decorations off, which should have been a dead giveaway that we were out of candy or that we weren't home. So I assumed it was my parents. Being cautious, I looked through the people and saw a suspicious man standing on our front porch. He was wearing a black hoodie with the hood over his head, which made it difficult to see his face. The only detail of his face that I could spot was that he had a beard and dry, crusty lips. There was no way that this guy was a trick-or-treater because he wasn't even wearing a costume and was far too old to be trick-or-treating alone. His hands were stuffed in the front pocket of his hoodie, and he looked very thin. Every single red flag went off in my head about this guy. There was no way in hell I was going to open this door. Still looking through the peephole, I watched as he knocked on the door again. He seemed desperate for us to open the door and was shaking a bit. It wasn't cold outside, definitely not cold enough for someone to be trembling. He was giving me a very bad vibe, and I wanted to get rid of him as soon as possible. "We're out of candy," I shouted to him. I watched as a smile spread across his face. It wasn't a friendly smile either. "Are you alone in there?" the man asked, almost in a mocking voice. His voice was raspy and dry. Should I call the police?" my little brother asked me quietly, gripping his cell phone. The man let out a low grumble and said, "Sounds like you're not alone in there." I continued to watch him through the peephole. His hands were still wedged tightly in his pocket, and he was still shaking a bit. I began to wonder if he was armed. I decided to take action and spoke to him in the most intimidating voice I could. "Get the fuck away from my house, or I'll call the police," I shouted. His smile faded, and he bared his teeth. His teeth were piss yellow, and I concluded that he was probably some homeless crackhead. He had a look of fury plastered on his face. Fortunately, he left without trying to break in, probably because he knew I wasn't fucking around with him. I didn't stop watching him through the peephole until I saw him completely off of our property. My brother and I breathed a sigh of relief and decided not to call the police. My brother and I were a bit paranoid after this and watched TV until our parents came home. We didn't tell them about the man since he hadn't really tried to harm us. Now, when I think back to this, I wish we had called the police because we would have been able to prevent a murder. You see, the next day, we found out that the elderly woman who lived a few houses down from us had been brutally murdered. Her neighbor had found her lying on her front porch, covered in blood. She had been stabbed multiple times in the chest and neck. My brother and I immediately knew who had done it, and we told the police what we knew. They couldn't do much from the information we had given them, since we hadn't seen many details of his face. They went on to hunt for the man, but never caught him. I blame myself for that poor lady's murder, because I could have prevented it from happening just by calling the police. I think the most disturbing thing of all of this is the fact that he didn't take anything from the old lady's house. Her house had been left untouched, but he could have gone in and taken what he wanted since her door was wide open. This means that he just wanted to kill. That was his only intention. He didn't want money or jewelry. He only had the urge to murder. So, to the creepy crackhead Halloween slasher, let's not meet. Halloween abduction. Let me clarify. This happened during my college Halloween celebrations a few years ago, and is the most terrifying experience of my life. One of my roommates, some friends, and myself left to go to a party around dusk, and we were catcalled by a group of 3 drifters or homeless people. We thought nothing of it and went our merry way. About 4 hours later, we were going back to our apartment to change shoes. High heels and messed up streets are hell when you've been drinking, when one of the drifters calls out to me, "Hey, beautiful, how about a kiss?" Me being a little drunk and sassy, I reply, "No thanks, girls are more my type." To my shock and to my horror, he says, "Hey, my friend here likes the ladies." A homeless girl comes out of nowhere and proceeds to kiss me on the mouth. My friend picks me up and throws me over his shoulder. I proceed to flip the fuck out in my apartment, shrug it off, and we venture back out. Well, I got separated from my group in the crowd, and then I see the 3 drifters again. I try not to show that I'm shitting bricks when they ask me where they can find a liquor store. I point down the street to the Kroger and they say, "Okay, you can show us." I'm a small woman, and they shoved me into their vehicle. I think, naively at the time, that they will literally let me out at the grocery store. Except it's closed because it's after midnight. I plead for them to let me out of the car, but they keep saying, "The power does what it wants," and headed away from the safety of the campus area onto the freeway and out of the state. For the next 4 hours, I visit 3 states with them while pleading for my life. I'll never forget how they kept saying, "The power does what it wants," and talking about how they're gonna have fun with me. I kind of resigned myself to the fact that I was going to die, and I would never graduate college or see my family again. They pulled into a gas station, and I slipped out of the vehicle to be grabbed again, but I screamed my head off for the clerk to help. That's when they talked about taking me to the cliff. I mentioned that my family is full of police officers, and that they're probably already looking for me, how they're committing a federal crime, and that I won't press charges if they just take me back to campus. I guess that's when the girl started to feel sorry for me, because she started to say, "Guys, she's really scared. Maybe we should just drop her off somewhere. This doesn't have to get any worse." They took me back to the campus area, and as soon as the girl pulled me out of the car, a police officer called my name. The girl shoved me towards the cop and yelled, "The power does what it wants, and tonight it lets you live." I've never been so happy to sit in a cruiser. They pursued them, but I don't know if they were ever caught. My roommate dropped out of college and joined the military, and I transferred to another school. So, ladies and gentlemen, please be careful walking at night. Always keep your cell phones with you if possible, and call the police if you see suspicious people near your apartment. I had a brush with death that day, and I'm so grateful for the time I have now. This could have been written better, but it's still so hard to talk about. Followed home on Halloween. When I was about 16 years old, we lived in a very old beach house. It was 2 stories, situated in the very corner edge of the neighborhood. Houses on one side, forest and campgrounds on the other. It creaked a lot, being so old, and was definitely not meant to be lived in during the winter anymore, but it's what we had. The bottom floor was pretty much just one big room, front to back, with a tiny separate kitchen and a tiny bathroom under the stairs by the front door. The other side had two huge glass doors looking out onto the large patio in the back. Next to the glass doors was a creaky metal spiral staircase going into the basement. Everything in this house made noise. Everything. At this point, I was sleeping in the living room. The futon was my bed and it was kinda nice. I had my own bathroom, I had the kitchen, and the TV, and I spent most nights sitting up on my computer. At this point, I should probably mention that there were no blinds or curtains. The windows had wooden shutters on them, and the back doors had no covering. Halloween night was very strange. I stayed up the night before making a dress and was very satisfied with the results. Braided my hair, had my makeup done at my place of work, and went around town with my mom to stop by all the local businesses that had things going on. Very small town. The streets were very crowded with people in costume. It was kinda boring actually, but my outfit made me happy anyways. Not long before heading home, I started to feel creeped out. Keep in mind that this is a town I frequently went for walks or bike rides in at odd hours of the night without any sort of sense of danger. Even for a creepy old ghost-like seaside New England town, it still didn't freak me out enough at 3 a.m. for me to feel unsafe as a 16-year-old girl on a walk. Maybe I just wasn't thinking right at that time in my life. Even with my mom and surrounded by people, I felt more uneasy than I did alone on a foggy night on the same street in the middle of off-season. We got home around 12:30 a.m. and I changed into my pajamas and sat on my computer playing video games until about 2 a.m. The glow from my screen lit up pretty much the whole living room. I started to feel uneasy again and decided to lie down. As was my reaction to feeling creeped out in my own home, I opted to ignore it. My screen was off, but I had an iMac, and there was a perpetual pulsing, glowing white circle on the front of it that continued to lighten the room. It acted as a kind of nightlight, almost. I had just been nestled comfortably in my blankets, just long enough for my sheets to warm up. A light rapping sound came from the glass doors. It happened just as I was drifting off, and I assumed I was just hearing things. It came again about 5 minutes later, knuckles on old loose glass, rap, rap, rap. And I lay there pretending to be asleep. Maybe they'll just go away. They didn't though. It came again, and again, and again. Getting louder, getting faster, and sooner every time. Rap, rap, rap. Until I couldn't handle it anymore. I made a show of angrily throwing off my covers, stomping to the front door pretending that I thought the knocking was coming from there, peeking out the window by it to emphasize my apparent confusion. The front door was luckily out of sight of the glass ones, and right next to the stairs. I ran up, trying to be quiet, and curled up into the corner of my mother's bathroom. This house had no real air system. There was a furnace that heated the basement, and all of the vents were just holes in the floor with slats over them. I was purposely sitting next to one, right above the area where the glass doors were. I should probably make note that the space my bed, computer, TV was in right next to the dining area, so the glass doors were about 20 feet away from where I was sleeping. The bathroom I was in was just above the dining area table. It was dark, but my computer was still pulsing that white light. The knocking had stopped when I got up. I sat in that bathroom, pissed off and scared, listening intently, staring into space. I heard footsteps on the metal stairs from the basement. The dining room floor creaked, and then my mason jar of pennies spilled coins across the floor. Whoever it was hit the jar and caught it before it tipped completely. I listened to them attempt to quietly put the bulk of it back in. They took a few steps, almost coming into view beneath my vent, before turning and heading back down into the basement. The jar of pennies and the surprisingly noisy house seemed to scare them off. They also had no way of knowing if I called the police or not, which I honestly should have, but adrenaline completely got in the way of logic. The next day, I checked the door to the basement from the outside, unlocked. Everyone always forgot to lock that damn door. I twisted the locking thing and pulled it back closed. It worked to stop the knob from turning, but I realized that the actual slot the door lock went into was broken. The only thing holding the door closed was the friction from expanded wood. I figured whoever it was in my house wouldn't try to push hard enough to open it and would probably just try to twist the handle. They never figured it out, and this never happened again. I know now that it was a gamble, and I was a dumb teenager, but it turned out okay. The next chilling discovery I made came that night. I stood outside the glass doors with my family inside, eating dinner not 10 feet away. It didn't matter how close I got to the glass. I could see them as clear as they. But they couldn't see me. When I sat up on my computer, even while I was sleeping due to my nightlight, you could see me clearly. I don't sleep with the lights on anymore. Later on, we covered the glass doors and windows with plastic sheeting in response to a hurricane. Never took it off.